So welcome with us. Happy time zone, as we say, because I don't know if it's evening where you are, or morning, or afternoon, or what it is, but it's evening here. It's 8 o'clock on Thursday again. My name is Eric, and today I have another Eric with me. And like we do every week, we stream about web accessibility. Why do I stream about web accessibility? Well, I am a web accessibility professional, as they call it. They call it. I don't call it that. I don't feel professional. It's just Googling on another level. But I work at ING, a big Dutch bank. I am there responsible for the accessibility of the web components that we have. These are the reusable components that are used throughout the organization. I am also a auditor, so I also look at websites. And would you like to introduce yourself, Eric? Other Eric.
Yes,
Also
please,
Eric.
this feels like a conversation with myself. That's amazing. Thank you for inviting me. That's the first thing I should say. My name is Eric Eggert. I work here in Essen, Germany, so it's also like afternoon for me, or even evening. Probably I don't have my own time zone right.
So you work for an international company, right?
Yes, I work for Nobility, which is a non-profit in Austin, Texas, that is specialized in making the web accessible with several like things that we do, and there's like one side who does like audits, like basically the things that all the accessibility people do, giving trainings, making sure that everyone that websites and applications are accessible. And then we have like a lot of community programs. One of those is called Access U, and Access U is a conference that we do every May, usually in Austin, Texas, but not this year, obviously.
Well, also in Austin, Texas this year.
But also in Austin, Texas, yes, like everywhere. And we have different other like things that we do. We have an air rallies. It's one of the ones that I like to highlight, and that's basically a competition so that multiple non-profits get a website made by professional design teams, and then they get judged by how accessible their websites are, and it's really interesting.
Is there a link for this?
Yes, everything can be found at nobility.org. That's KNOW ability.org.
My browser recognized the address. I'll just paste it in the chat. That's one.
And the other one is airrallies.org. That's
like air as in sky?
Air like air, yes, and then rallies. I can put it in.
Oh yeah, sure. You're more than welcome. People know that you're in there as well. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, air-rallies. Okay.
Yes, air-rallies.org.
Nice.
And that's always like really nice because people, take part in a community experience and learn about.
The website is not responsive.
I'm not responsible for that part of the organization.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. That's just the first thing that I see. I see this thing that cuts off, and I just can't help it.
It's. Thank you for the valuable feedback. I will inform the people who can change that.
I aim to contribute. Okay, and so you usually have this conversation with people in Austin, Texas. You have a nice conference there. And you have talked there before or digitally about respecting user preferences on the web.
Yeah, it's a talk that I started, I want to say, almost a year ago, and it's basically thinking about what we do on the web and how we can make sure that that we respect what users want from the web. I can dive right in, and I have already introduced me. Maybe the one only noticeable thing about me is that I worked for W3C, Web Accessibility Initiative in the past. So that was fun. So if anyone has questions about that, I can answer questions. Mostly with I can talk about that.
So when was the last bit of work that you did for W3C?
The the last bit of work was in March, so I worked there from December 2013 to March 2020.
Okay.
And the last thing I did was thinking back. Well, we did the whole way redesign, so all of the new shiny blue side. That was like the biggest occupation in the end. Also did the WCAG quick reference that a lot of people are using on a daily basis, and the web accessibility tutorials that we have. And yeah, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, that's
Somebody else
good.
says that the website is responsive for them. I was talking about the air rallies, but I'm just gonna drag it into my screen, I guess. It's just you're seeing the stream, right? See, it's just
I'm
this.
not seeing the stream.
It's just this part where it says the accessible internet rally.
Oh yeah,
And
that's
it cuts
just
off.
too long of a text.
Yeah,
Yeah. That
you
can
should
be
pick a
fixed.
shorter name, I guess. Yeah, that's how you help it.
Ah.
Yeah, okay, but do you feel like things have changed since you have quit at the W3C? Has your life changed much, or?
Well, it's different. I got different responsibilities with nobility, and it's just a different type of work. Working with W3C is because there's a lot of process involved and a lot of like community herding. It's a different type of work than in your usual company. You always need to go back to the group and ask them what they think, and then they come back with hopefully good good feedback that you can implement. And which usually it is great. Like the community process is like really amazing, and you get like really good resources with that. So I really enjoyed that. Yeah, but now I make a difference in another part, in a different role, and that also is a lot of fun. Maybe I should say that, like in the first couple of years at W3C, it was an EU project that I worked for. That was when the quick reference and the tutorials were created, and a couple of other things that you might have seen.
We just before we started, we talked a little bit about people about sending other people to resources. Like, what can you give? I love giving the quick reference. Just that you can filter it by tags and everything makes it so easy to use. So there are not many resources. There are not many resources that I like, but the quick reference is really easy. Yeah. So thanks for that.
Yeah. And those resources are all community resources. So if you have a comment or you want to change something, you can actually do that. You can make the changes on GitHub directly if you are technically inclined to do so. That's a lot what we have changed. That wasn't possible before. When I started in 2013, we had nothing on GitHub, and now basically everything is there.
That's a big change.
So that's really cool. Yeah. And then for the rest of the time, basically Nobility sent me to W3C as in a so-called fellowship, which basically means I was for half of my time a full staff member at W3C. So that was also nice. But yeah. Priorities change, and now I'm working with more with Nobility, which also is amazing.
So you got the best of both worlds, basically.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, especially at W3C. You got all those like different cultures and different influences, so that really makes a difference in how you work and how you see things.
I think it's something that I like about the whole accessibility field in general. Like, at a certain point, you might feel that you know a lot about a certain subject, but it's always dangerous. But then you meet people at the W3C, for example, and everybody has a different background. So everybody is a specialist in a different field, and there's so much more to learn always.
Yeah, that's true. And at W3C, and that's with like the utmost respect, everyone is a nerd. It's like everyone is like burning for their subject and for their mission, and that
It's all
is
very
really
passionate.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So, nerds. So, how do you create something for users with a bunch of nerds?
that's a good question. And we want to create a better web for users, and our users are all like different. No one is the same. But when you look at the web, we often like design like they are the same people, like, and we develop like they are the same, like there's no difference. Um, and the question is really, what does inclusive design even mean? And I hope that like this presentation and this conversation helps a little bit with like defining what that is.
And if there are still questions, people can ask them.
Yeah, always ask questions. I mean, asking questions is probably the most important thing that we can do, as humans on this planet. So yeah, I'm happy to answer anything.
Yep.
It was probably too much permission, but I take it. Um, so the basic thing is, how does a person interact with like the web? That's what we need to answer to say, okay, inclusive design makes it so that everyone can interact with the web. That's the most important thing. And most people are using like a keyboard and a mouse and other their fingers to just interact with content, but some people are using different things. And I mean, in this Twitch stream, probably screen readers are a known quantity. Like everyone knows what screen readers are, but there are differences between them. And one of the things that was like big waves a couple of months ago was the thing that VoiceOver and Safari removed the list element semantics when you use list style none. And Scott O'Hara wrote a blog post and also how to address that issue if it is even one. So you are in that situation where this is a list, and that's an ordered list with like bullet points before the list items.
Yeah, I would say this is 3 list items with default bullet points before them.
Yeah, really, really simple. And that would be announced as a list in VoiceOver, but this, which is the same text, the same structure, but without the bullet points, would not be announced as a list. So VoiceOver would just handle it as paragraphs. So
yeah, and I think the same issue was also with display block, which is also something that we like to use for menus or whatever.
Right. So basically, once the list doesn't look like a list, it will not be announced. That's like the shortcut that you can
the short version.
About. Yeah. And so basically, all the web developers were what? And those are 3 GIFs of Doctor Who's, the 9th Doctor, the 10th Doctor, and the 13th Doctor.
And they're all wondering what happens.
What?
Yeah.
Yes, because web developers were saying that. And then, James Craig of Apple, which is a great person and always like very communicative and responsive on those things. He basically said that was a purposeful change because we web developers, we put everything in lists all the time. You have a couple of articles, they're all in lists. You have like a navigation, it's all in lists. Having that announced was something where they got feedback and said, let's change that. Let's try to find a middle ground. And of course, the web developers were like, wait, no, hang on a sec. And as illustrated by Dr. 13. And, the real thing that you need to ask, what does that mean for me as someone who has put list semantics into the HTML and made sure that it's everything is a nice list. Everything that looks like that could be a list is a list.
Yeah, because in general, when we think about screen readers, we think about something that interprets the DOM. Basically, you've got HTML, and there's something going to the accessibility API, as some people might be familiar with, and from the accessibility API, it goes to a screen reader. And just that the idea that something like CSS, which should only be presentational, which should only be responsible for the visible part, that it influences something like a screen reader, that's pretty, well, unusual, right?
It's actually not so unusual because display none does that. If you think about that, that's a similar thing, you know. It's like, should that be available for screen readers? There was like, when I started with accessibility, there was this myth, and I don't know if that, maybe screen readers were different then, but there was the myth that display none would not be announced in screen readers, but visibility hidden would be. I don't know if that was ever true, but there was like a short period of time where people were like, oh, if you want to show, if you want to hide something from a user but not from a screen reader, you use visibility hidden, which is not how it works. Visibility hidden works exactly like display none, at least nowadays. And you know, so there is always this like interaction. What is with generated content? So before and after and content. You know, if you have in parentheses PDF behind a link, do you want that to read out for the screen reader, or don't you want that?
Is it actual content or is it decorative, right?
Yeah, so that's the question, and those are good questions, and we don't have like a universal answer. In some places it might be decorative use, in other places it might be, you know, not decorative. So what browsers basically decided is always announce it. And so it is in the accessible name in the label. And it's similar with this, like, okay, what does that mean for me as a developer? I did everything right. I think, you know, I care about accessibility.
Yeah.
I put as much information into the page.
You think you're adding semantics, which is usually a good thing. Yeah.
But what does that mean, you know? And it doesn't mean anything, really, because the screen reader user is used to their screen reader. And if you actually look at the like timeline of what happened, it's pretty clear that the impact for like actual users was not negative. So in 2014, there was the first commit into like WebKit that looked at lists and said, oh, some are presentational lists and others are unpresentational lists. And then in 2015, some more code was added, you know, was more precise, worked better. And then nothing happened until January 2019, where there was like a big brouhaha. So basically 5 years where nobody cared.
Yeah. And then Twitter happened probably.
And then Twitter happened.
Yeah,
yes.
it's always
and everyone
Twitter.
was like,
yeah.
Is that how it should work? And those are good questions. I'm not saying we shouldn't ask those questions because they are important. And if we would start over with HTML and CSS, we probably would do something different. And I've long been saying we should have, like, SVG has a group tag. Why don't we have a group element in HTML, you know? Because sometimes things that we think as a list are just a group of things, like very generic, like divs. So yeah,
I could even read your face when you said that. It's like I thought this was supposed to be a neutral element, but that was not a neutral face.
It's more neutral-ish, you know.
Yeah.
At least more neutral than like this is a list, because that's actually quite a strong statement.
Yeah.
And you know, and because Apple is Apple, they asked their users, and they did get less customers that complained about lists. They got generally less complaints about that, so the customers seem to be happy. And I think that's the thing you have to acknowledge, you know, even if you think like everything I type into HTML should be like there should be in an optimal world that would be the case.
The deciding metric in this case was customer happiness.
Yeah, because that's what screen reader do, right? They need to work for their users, and so that was the thing that they pinned it on. And yeah, in an optimal world, we would have like this HTML, maybe with this CSS, means this is the output in the screen reader, But that doesn't even happen with HTML and CSS for like visual browsers. And we have this do websites need to look exactly the same in every browser.com phenomenon that we say, no, they don't, and if you have a smaller screen, it looks different than if you have a larger screen.
Yeah.
And if a CSS thing is not supported, then there's a fallback, and that's fine, And the same thing applies to screen readers, because in the end, screen readers are just like browsers you hear.
So I'm already thinking like we used to have this form and function were supposed to be linked, right? So I guess now it's more like form follows functionality.
Yeah, you could say that. So it needs to be useful for the user. It does not need to be pure. And if we got one good thing from the HTML5 specification, and we got lots of good things from the HTML5
but if you could pick one, yeah.
Shouldn't just say. But if I need to pick one, it's the design principles that says users above developers, above theoretical purity, above something else. So there are 4 or 5
users,
things,
just the first thing.
Basically, the users is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I agree with that, and that's why that stuff is so important. And the other thing is that screen readers are super adaptable to yourself. Those are very small, because I want to not to talk long about it, but those are the configuration options for VoiceOver in general. So you can say, if I repeat my if I have 17 exclamation marks to just make a point really clearly on Twitter, VoiceOver by default will only read the first 3. Or
I think if you need more than 3 exclamation marks, that sounds very reasonable, right?
Yeah. But it's not what the author put into the tweet or onto the website. It's not read, and that's a decision that the user can make, and they can change that. They can say, always read all the exclamation marks to me, please, which would be a very strange choice, but each their own.
Maybe if you don't visit Twitter much, then it's okay.
Yeah, people also yell on other platforms.
That's true.
And you can set the verbosity to medium and low and high. So you have this different things, and I think for every screen reader user, their screen reader sounds differently and reads different things. And you can even make your screen reader pronounce GIF as GIF, although that's wrong.
How do you say it in German?
GIF.
Yeah, it's different, right? So much easier.
Well, for me, it's pretty much the same.
in Dutch, we say GIF.
Oh,
so I don't have to pick.
You get this throat. Throat thing that
we've got it.
That I can't even make.
Yeah, it's why Dutch people sound like they're choking.
Yeah, German people that are choking. That's about it. Yeah, no, I think for user preferences, it's totally important that we realize as a community that we don't have a lot of control over things. There is no control over the output of our websites or our or how it's read or how it's viewed even. And people say, but there's ARIA, and of course I have ARIA slides, because what's a presentation without ARIA slides? And ARIA can help a little bit with that, because you can specify different things like your landmarks and your ARIA labels and stuff like that. That's pretty straightforward. But we also have to remind ourselves that accessibility is not only screen readers, and ARIA is pretty bad for everything that's not a screen reader, like for most assistive technologies.
Is it actually bad, or it just doesn't add anything?
Well, it doesn't apply. Like a lot of if you use a voice input software, like a natural speaking dragon. I don't know how I get to that.
It's fine.
then it just is like it has little support for it, just a couple of things, and they're usually like really badly supported. So yeah, I think I think ARIA is not like the thing that makes sure that everything is output as we put it in.
It's not a holy grail. No.
To remind that. The other one is like high contrast mode. If you think about that, especially with ARIA, if you have links that are ARIA links but they are not real links, and you put high contrast mode on, the functionality is just not there. It will just use the normal text color because it does not interpret the ARIA.
Yeah, it might be hard to see with the compression, but I think what you made a screenshot of is that you've got native HTML links, and you've got links made with ARIA, and then you go to high contrast mode, and some of them get picked up by high contrast mode and others don't, right?
Yes, so in high contrast mode, basically links get a different color that the user can specify. And if you just use an ARIA role link, then it does not apply. It
doesn't
treats
count.
it like normal text. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that's you could say Microsoft needs to go in and fix that as a bug, but on the other hand, most web developers should know better and just use links if they want to make links.
The person who used ARIA was the one who started it by default, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. But back to users. Users are so different. Also with like knowledge levels. That's something we rarely look into, even if we think about accessibility. There are a lot of people that either don't know what their computers can do for them. Like, I don't know. I'm pretty savvy with like computers and all that stuff, but I know that I have friends and like people even in my age group that don't care and are not like nerds like I am, and I can't understand that, but it's true.
Yeah.
And and they don't know what they can do. They don't know about high contrast mode or screen readers or anything.
Yeah, and the fun thing...
I want to join the dedicated episode about the pronunciation of GIF.
Yeah.
I'm happy to stand my ground.
Guests from all over the world, how do you pronounce it? Should we get a linguist then or something?
It's your Twitch stream.
Yeah.
You can do what you want.
I will make a list of all the linguists that I know, and then we'll see. But yeah, what you say is true. Like, users can surprise you, but it's funny that it's also the other way around. Like, sometimes I see somebody using assistive technology or a screen reader, and they surprise me, Like, I didn't know it could do that. I didn't know there was a setting for that. And sometimes even they use a tool for something completely different than I thought it was for. So
yeah, and sometimes users hack their assistive technology to make them work with inaccessible sites.
Which is the wrong way around, but still, yeah.
Yeah, you can't underestimate users as well, because that's exactly it. I had one person I worked with at W3C who used like a specific style sheet and a specific JavaScript because they were a low vision user, and they basically hacked the whole of GitHub to their liking. And I guess that all broke when GitHub redesigned.
I think hacking GitHub is a really nice combination in itself already. So
yes, yeah. So, but he needed to do that because everything was not responsive, and I think it still isn't really. So and if you use low vision and you have like everything like 400% blown up, it's so hard to like horizontally scroll, and it's so unnecessary like for comments and stuff. So yeah, it was the only way, and that person could do that, and other people cannot. And so
so to that person, it was basically the web we want, right? They just changed the web to be what they needed it to be.
Yeah. But that costs time and dedication and resources, and not everyone can do that and should be needed to do that. Um,
It's a privilege if you can do that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I mean that's like one of the advantages that we as like web professionals, web developers have, that we can um, do stuff and change stuff and just make it work for us. We don't, if like a download link is broken, but there's another download link that and I can deduct what the issue is. Like there's another like letter in before the HTTP, which always happens to me. Then oh, I can just copy and paste that from the source code and fix it for me.
I think I open the inspector, the web inspector, for non-professional reasons at least once a week. Like
Yeah,
making a form work, removing something that is required, or buttons that won't do anything, or sometimes it feels like a superpower because I can do things that were not supposed to be happening in my browser, but it's like strange, right?
yeah, yeah, and I mean that's like the big thing with like the web, is that it's so adaptable. Couple of years ago, I know that I showed my parents how to they wanted to print something for like for the documents, and it was like, yeah, this should be printable. And and basically they were like, yeah, and I tried to print it, and they had like those absolute positioned elements, and they were like all over the text in the print view, and I could go in and just remove them and make a nice print thing, and then we printed it and put it in a binder somewhere.
And never touch it ever, no.
And probably never touch it ever, but it was possible. And
you just think, hey, let me just inspect that, let me remove that, and I'll fix it for you. And for you, it's easy.
Yeah, and I mean, archiving and making copies for yourself is also a big use case for web content. I think we don't have that on our mind often, but I save articles into my personal stash because I don't want websites to go away. And if they go away, I want to have a copy. But yeah, that's just so much easier if you can hack your way around. And the thing is, how I think
got a chat question before we go off on another path. Removing the required state for an input in a form. Do you do that for privacy reasons? Eric. Oh, it's Eric with a K, so that's me. It's nice that we have that distinction.
Slightly confusing.
Yeah, sometimes I do. I'm also the type of user that when I see a form, I start by pressing submit, so I can see what is actually required, because I don't want to fill it all in. I mean, it's work. I don't want to work for your website, especially if it isn't needed. So often it's just energy. Like, I don't care what information you need, but I'm not going to tell you. And then privacy also. Like, I should have remembered there was this website this week that asked for my gender, and I was like, how is that important? How is my gender going to play a role in this?
I get that all the time. Like, when there's like you have to put in your gender, and I'm like, I'm not even bothering if I don't like need to fill, to get to that information, or if it's like not needed. I'm like, you don't need to know that.
No, the amount of information that they can ask is just ridiculous. That's
and I mean that thankfully that got better with the GDPR stuff. I feel like people are asking for less data, but it's still like
still too much.
Pretty much. Still too much. It will always be too much, to be honest.
Yeah.
So the thing is, how I think about users is that they are on the scale. The user has a disability type that can be, not disabled, like not impacted by a disability for the specific task, to like, different types of disabilities, different capabilities at different times. So that's basically everything that's under impairment and disability and all that. And then there's proficiency. What can they bring from their experience to the problem, to the task, to make it work, And then there's accessibility support, and that's basically what does the website provide in content, in information that then the user can use with their proficiency and their assistive technology to overcome the barrier. So that's like my mental model how I define what a user is at any given time. And I think that that makes it really interesting to think about that typical user, because you always have to think about, like, okay, what different things do I really think about at that point? And yeah, the most important thing is that you on your website allow the use of assistive technology that suits a particular user's needs. That you don't say, oh, you have to use this screen reader or this browser or this extension or this or that. In an optimal world, you should just say, come with whatever you want, and you will be happy, and you will achieve your tasks. And I think we as a community, as developers, we need to prescribe. We need not to prescribe how to use a component, not you have to do this and that and that, but we need to use HTML to describe what we have. And if that information, like the list elements, is then used, is a different thing. We describe the content to the best of our abilities, and then the assistive technology can either use that or not use that as they see fit. And that's basically what I think the best approach is. And the other thing is, like, just don't expect any proficiency from users, even if you have like a very specialized website. People will come and they will not know anything.
Yeah.
Or they will be like starting out and just getting into it. And I see that a lot with like accessibility sites as well, where we just have so much jargon and so much things that we just say, oh, you have to know that before you can even like join the conversation. And I think that's really hurtful. So
yeah, I think it's also interesting because I've had this experience at ING. We love orange. And orange is a color in itself. It's really hard to get a good contrast with orange, because orange, they want to combine it with white. And with white, you get really bad contrast. And they don't want to combine it with black, because black is very negative. So they don't want to do that. And at a certain point, we got buttons. And there was white text inside an orange button. And the contrast ratio was exactly 3.0 to 1, which is just enough for large text. So all buttons got large text. And I was pretty happy.
Very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's an improvement, right? So we should celebrate every improvement that we get. But the fun thing is we got feedback. Like, why do you have such big buttons? Like, could it be a problem to make something as easy as possible? Like, you made it too easy for me? Is that an issue? So somehow, I think that you should make it as easy as possible. But don't expect any proficiency. Make sure that everybody can use it. And if you're even better, good. I think you should be happy with that. If the button is really big and you can touch it easily, good. You're a good toucher or something. But it really stunned me. Like, can we make it too easy then? Can we make it too simple?
Yeah, and I have heard that a lot, like with like line length and like space on the left and the right of the website. Why are we wasting so much space? And I'm like, this is not wasted space. It's white space, and you can use that to organize your site, and you can have like two windows next to each other and stuff like that. But
do you know how useful that is when you're streaming to have lots of white space? Yeah, I've got too many windows here. Yeah,
I can only imagine. But to go back to Orange, the fun thing is that Orange, and I only learned that recently, that orange is not a color of itself. So brown and orange are actually the same color, and it just depends in which like the surrounding light is. So if you have a shade of orange and you put it on white, it looks orange. If you put it on black, it looks brown. And that's
orange is just really colorful brown, basically.
Yes, it's basically brown with a lot of light, and because the WCAG color contrast thing looks at the lightness, at the difference of the light between colors. To get orange, you have to be on white, and that just makes it different. And there's a great video that I found and put in, and I'm putting that in the chat right now.
Oh,
Send all your bits. I learned that to say that on Twitch. That explains that phenomenon really nicely. So I've seen that a couple of weeks ago and like blew my mind. Okay, that's why we have issues with orange and contrast.
because orange is nothing.
Yeah, because once you put enough contrast on it, it's not orange anymore.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
Yeah, it's just like yellow. Try to find contrasty yellow with white. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, right. So it's weird. Colors are weird. User perception, like how our eyes and brains work. Who can understand that?
And wake contrast ratio is even weirder. I mean, I did a stream on it a few weeks ago. And did you know that it's actually based on a specification for HD video? I mean, it doesn't even have to do anything with the web.
Yeah, I mean, it was the best thing they had at that time.
Yeah.
But
But when you say it like that, it's like...
Yeah, it is very old technology. I mean, the physics still work out because it's light and stuff.
Yeah, physics don't change often. I like that. Yeah.
Yes, it's one of the dependable things.
Yeah.
But of course now we have like a lot of people have like those wide color gamut screens, which there's no, you just it's just a different system, and so you can't actually say, okay, what's the contrast of this high contrast or high color gamut thing with the other high color gamut thing.
We can give our best answer that we have. It depends.
Yeah, yes, yeah, right. Yeah, the thing is, nobody expected that to be the case, or at least maybe people didn't expect WCAG to be around that long. I don't know, but yeah, it's interesting, and we need to to keep up with stuff like that, because I think on a like high white color gamut display, you probably can get a good contrast with orange even. Because you can make the orange darker because you have more space just stretched out.
But is it in that part of the spectrum? That's then the question.
Yeah.
Let's not dive into colors. We can do another time.
I mean, my slides are light green with brown text.
Yeah.
Don't ask me about colors.
Yeah. That's not coincidence, no.
Yeah. The thing is that users, to go back to user preferences, which, your buttons are not because they're decidedly orange.
Yep. Nobody wants it.
That they get a lot more tools to use. And I think that's like really one of the big like shifts that we have on the web in the past couple of years. And that all began for me like with reader mode. And if you use an Apple device and Safari browser, you have since like years and years you have this reader mode, and you can just go through and adjust the color and use a white text on black or black text on white, or have different colors, different font options, all the things, and that works for. This is available for 10 years now in Safari, and it's like really useful because often I just want to read the article and reader mode gives me that.
Yeah. I use it in Firefox sometimes, and it's like this button that just filters out the crap, basically. It's really good.
Yes, and it's even like, please give us your data, and then you click the reader button, and it pulls the content like out from behind the dialogue, and you can just read it. So it's really long in Safari. You can set it to default, so whenever you come to my website, you don't have to see my ugly colors. You can just set it to your preferred colors, which I totally approve. And it's since 5 years, it's also available in Firefox and in Edge. And in Chrome, it is supposed to be launched soon. And basically, whenever I use this slide deck, I put another question mark after the soon. So we don't really know.
I learned today that VoiceOver will only read 3 of those. So At a certain point, they become decorative, right?
Yeah. It's more like a decorative punctuation.
Yeah.
That's how the Firefox one looks. It's also great because it has a reading functionality, so you can just like have it read to you, which is nice. And you can have other website settings and a lot of and I use personally Safari for everything, like even if I do web development, and people are going like, how can you do that? But it just suits how I work, which probably tells more about me than about other people. And but the thing that they did as like the first thing was like having settings for different websites. So and in a nice like overlay thing. So I can say I want to use Reader when it's available. I can enable content blockers, so ad blockers and other things. I can set page zoom for every page. Like I want this in 125%. I want this page in 150% page zoom. I will disallow all autoplay, which is a super convenient feature, and like
always every website.
Yes, and you basically, so you open the browser and you go in and you say, please never autoplay anything. Thank you very much.
You do not know this functionality. It just never existed in the first place. No.
Yes, and that's so useful, and a couple of other browsers do that now too. But actually that brought a couple of problems for me because when I do audits, some of our clients had like background auto-playing video, and I just didn't see it. I was like, what video are you talking about? And I was like, oh yeah, I probably should like switch that off. So that's like the first thing I do. Don't do that for this.
It's just like when people say like, oh, there are so many ads on that website, and I'm like, I've never seen one. Are there ads on that website? What are ads?
Yeah, I mean that's but that's again, that's nerdy stuff in the end. I'm really happy that in Safari it's mildly accessible from a user point of view, so you can do the right click on the like navigation bar, or you can go into settings, and I think it's pretty well explained there.
But it's strange, right? It's like we have to make the web usable again. Like the user has to put in the work because the developer or the designer didn't. It's like the burden is on the wrong person.
Yeah, and it's a little bit like that, but on the other hand, like at least this way, it's like in the browser, and it's the same for every website. You don't have to go through everything, because I think we put a lot of burden on web developers. We basically say, oh, you have to make that accessible, you have to make that performant, you have to make that secure. There's a lot of stuff that we just throw over the line, and with stuff like that, we can basically switch that around and say, do what you want to do. We're probably not very happy with that, but we can fix that in the browser. I don't know. Can we start again? You can just dial back the stream. That works for you.
You can always give a summary if you like.
Basically, users great, developers bad.
We have to do all the work. But let us do all the work. Let us do all the work. Yes.
Yeah, but that shows like how this is a negotiation. It's basically negotiating between what the designer and the developer wants, and then the user says, oh, but I actually want only to see that. So it's like, it's very democratic if you think about it that way. Probably don't think about it that way too much. And there's a lot of other stuff that you can do, like getting user system preferences and use them on your website. And we all have seen that. Those settings, like invert colors, reduce motion, use grayscale, increase contrast, and reduce transparency.
Make it actually usable. That like by default you can't use your keyboard to navigate a website. That's in the same area, right?
It's a little bit, but it's the thing is, different users have really different needs, like
Yeah.
especially with things like animations and other things. It's so hard, and also when we talked about Windows High Contrast Mode, which is a totally bad name for what it is, because there are like hundreds of users that use Windows High Contrast Mode to make low contrast, because you can actually set all the settings yourself. And it's like, yeah, you should probably say it's like
Windows contrast
color
settings or something.
yeah, color settings. I
Yeah.
don't know, but it has that name, and it's like, I know why it has that name, but it makes no sense and makes the wrong impression.
Yeah, but when we start discussing naming things, I think we're gonna have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, naming is hard.
Yeah.
I guess most people know about prefers reduced motion. That was like the big first thing that we got.
Pretty popular. Yeah. At least for
Pretty
developers.
popular. It's a good thing. Use it everywhere. Use it defensively, like in the code example that I put on the screen. I basically said only do animation if the user has no preference set for animation.
So sort of like safe defaults.
Yeah, so that basically means there's no there's no animation unless you as a user say, yeah, I want animation. That makes a lot of sense to me, because most animation is really secondary, and that does not mean every animation is problematic. It's mostly like zooming. It's mostly like if things have like a parallax effect, that's often problematic for people.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah, if you just change a color or like move something a little bit, it's usually not a problem. But yeah, you know, test with users. That's always the thing.
Animation and subtlety don't go hand in hand very often, I think. No.
Yeah. The other one is prefers color scheme, which everyone uses because we all want dark modes on our website. So that's a thing, and you can just really quickly say prefers color scheme dark, and then set your variables differently, and you get a dark theme, and that's really super useful. And yeah, you can do a lot of stuff with that. And I like that. A lot of people say you also should provide a way for the user to have a setting. So if they use dark mode but they want to read black text on a white background, you should enable that, which makes sense.
Some websites are terrible in dark mode.
Yeah, but it's always like this thing, like oh, now I set it to light mode, and the next time I return from a link from somewhere on the internet, it's like in light mode, although I actually didn't want it in light mode this time. But you have remembered that. Why are you broken? So it's like, this is really tough sometimes. Like, what is the right thing to do? So basically, use reader mode. If you want a different thing, you just use reader mode.
You're just a big reader mode fan. Okay, it's clear. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. And we get lots of other tools like that to use in Media Queries level 5. So that's CSS specification. I should have put that on the slide that it's CSS, but well.
You're telling us.
Yeah. One of them is inverted colors. So if you have your colors inverted, you can do different things with it. Now you would say, why would I want to interfere with that as a website user? And one of the use cases that I know of and that I always use is like, if you have a design thing, like you have an online shop and you want to pick a color for your clothes, you don't want those colors to be inverted.
That would be interesting.
So it would be interesting, but
yeah.
It would probably also be confusing. So in that cases, it makes sense to say, are the colors inverted? Then I can invert my inverted colors to have the proper color. Other one is prefers reduced transparency, which basically I don't think like transparency is as much a thing on the web anymore as it used to be a couple of years ago. See how that changes.
I think I'm fine with that. Yeah.
I think so too. Now we get the new macOS version gets a lot of transparency back, so we probably will see a lot of transparency back on the web again, because that's always like how it works. But you will be able.
Let's just follow the big companies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's what most web developers just see all the time. You know, if you look at an operating system that has those principles, you will, and they work for you as intuitive, you will put them into your work.
Yeah, and probably if the next version of Bootstrap or whatever will use transparency, then we're going to see a lot of transparency.
Yes, that's for sure. That's for sure. People love to use Bootstrap for no apparent reason.
Some things never change. No.
No, not. Then there's prefer contrast, and that's one I'm very excited about, because currently we do like the basic WCAG principle is like you have to have decent contrast, like 4.5 to 1. With this setting, we can say if the user says they want high contrast, we can have a theme that incorporates our colors, our color scheme, and has a 7:1 contrast ratio and hits like the AAA criterion. How cool is that?
Without making an alternative website or a special button or anything like that.
Yeah, and without like compromising on the core accessibility. And you, with your orange, you could say, okay, if a user wants high contrast mode, then
don't use orange.
I don't use orange. I have a blue button, and that's just how it is displayed.
Yeah.
I guess with orange goes blue. It's always the same color combination. It's not
low contrast will work though. I think we're really good at it. So.
Yeah, so you don't have to do anything for that. But yeah, that's the other thing. Even like the standard basic contrast is too much for a lot of people. So you can say, oh, I want stuff low, or like in the evening, you're sitting outside, you're looking at your phone, you want to read that article, and you say, oh, I want my dark mode, but I also want low contrast. To make sure that, I get, I don't get blinded by my phone. So that's useful.
Yeah, and some people, they can get even migraines from having black on white or white on black, or they're just really sensitive to light. So yeah, they can select low contrast then when they get support.
Yeah, and I hope we get that stuff soon. I mean, that's always the thing. Like, you have to put it in CSS, then you have to make sure that everyone is using it, then you have to make sure that the browser uses it.
It sounds very useful.
But yeah, and it's not a big thing, I think, from an implementation standpoint, like for the browsers, if they want to do it, it's just another media query. It doesn't feel too hard for me, and probably I get like email after this that says, no, this is like a big headache.
Don't ever say that again. Yeah, I've never made a browser, so I wouldn't know, but I can imagine it would not be the hardest thing they ever did.
Yeah, I looked at the WebKit source code once, and I was like, this is very complicated stuff. I should not mess with that.
That's why you only look at it once, right?
Yes. Yeah. Basically, that's how it worked out. Then there's forced colors, which basically is a media query for high contrast for Windows high contrast mode. No, not Windows high contrast mode. I made air quotes around Windows and high contrast mode. I wanted to make air quotes only about the high and high contrast mode.
Yeah, the contrast mode. Yeah.
And basically the same thing as with the invert colors media query. Just making sure that if you need to make counter adjustments for a specific use case, you can do that.
So basically forced colors means I want to force my own color palette. Yes.
Which is what Windows High Contrast Mode does.
Yeah.
And one of the things is, in Windows High Contrast Mode, shadows are not rendered. Like if you use box shadow, it's just not there.
And people love box shadows, but doesn't work. No.
Yeah, and a lot of people use that to like distinguish different areas on the page, and make sure there's like a visual, flow to it. And what you can do right now is you do a transparent border in addition to the shadow, and those transparent borders actually get the current color when you are in Windows High Contrast Mode. So that's a nice thing. But if you have a media query like that, you can make other adjustments that make it even better. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. And there is a Windows high contrast mode media query that is there, but it's not a standard media query. I probably should say that.
Yeah, it's a craft in itself, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has different, like, really complicated, like, font names and stuff, and not font names, color names that you can use. And that the thing is, that sounds always interesting to me, but because I'm not full time on Windows, it feels like it's a hard time, like, testing that and make that, like, really nice for people. I would love to do that, and I hope that we get Windows High Contrast testability in an Edge browser soon.
Soon.
I have heard something about
it's all
that.
soon. Yeah.
Yeah, well, stuff like that takes time, especially if it was like an integrated, like, operating system level thing that happened, and now it's different. It needs to be ported over and stuff. If only everything was easy. The other thing that we get is environment media queries, and I'm excited for them because they basically react to everything that's happening around you. So it has a little bit of this AR thing going on. And one of them is like light level. So what happens when you are in the sun and your screen is washed out? So you can have that. And you can increase the contrast. So, you can basically string all those things together and have like this really like big thing that goes on.
I think I would turn this off. I mean, you have all these devices that say like we auto set your contrast or auto set your brightness, right?
Yeah.
They never get it right.
Yeah, that's tough. Like, brightness is really tough. And yeah, so some are better than others. There is this functionality that's called it's not night shift, it's the other one, that basically changes the color of your screen based on your surrounding colors.
You've got separate apps for that as well, and yeah, I know what you mean. So it gets more red or more yellow.
Yeah, and the nice thing, like, on Apple devices, that's like built in, and it works actually really nicely. Like, there's no lag or anything, and you always feel like it's a little bit nicer to look at the screen. At least that was my impression. But especially like the brightness level, that's so dependent on what you think is a good brightness level that it's really
it's also, I have a background in photography, so it's all about color management and stuff like that. And when I see a picture, I just want to see the picture it was meant to be. Don't change the colors, don't change the contrast, don't change the brightness. I've got my screen set up, and don't touch my stuff, basically.
Yeah, and that's a decision you should be able to do.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting what's possible, and different needs that different users have. I'm happy with like any adjustment.
Yeah.
Another thing that is in there is environment blending, and I have that in because it's so futuristic. Like, especially for web stuff. Think about cars with like head-up displays where you have like stuff projected on a little piece of plastic so you can see it like in the windscreen. And we get that as a media query in media query level 5. Probably. Maybe. It's planned.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly. And that means that you can say, okay, this is now on a heads-up display website, and I can make stuff transparent, or I can make, change the contrast of the colors so they work better on such a display. It sounds super cool to me. Also for like AR glasses or something like that. Sounds pretty neat.
Yeah.
So yeah, looking forward to that. It sounds very complicated in the specification. It's like a lot of small text on the slide.
We're gonna see somebody have some amazing example, and we'll all be like, "Oh, right, that's a great use case. Why didn't I think of that?"
Yes, I can now see my table on my heads-up display in my car while I drive.
Yeah, that's the dream.
That makes no sense. But
Yeah.
a lot of stuff like in media players and stuff is HTML, like
Yeah.
implemented on screens. So it would not surprise me if like a lot of that technology was actually HTML and CSS.
Yeah, for example, like I use Spotify a lot, and I think a lot of people do. And I think for their desktop client, they use Electron,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I bet they would love this.
Yeah, yeah. I think there are good use cases for that stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward of what can we do and how big our media queries can get, so we can like really focus on this specific use cases.
Yeah.
That sounds good. As a conclusion, I say do not make assumptions about users and the tools they use. Prepare your content and design for different circumstances. So put as much HTML and CSS and data in there as you can, and just be okay with people not with people mangling your code or like extracting it or
Yeah.
looking at it with different technologies.
So if I get my own impression from all of this, basically the better your base is, if you have a really solid core of what you've made, the less it matters what people do with it.
Yeah, and the more enables people to change stuff. Like if you don't use landmarks, for example, there's a user will have a much harder time if they need to use a different CSS, or if you don't have a main landmark, probably the reader mode won't work as well. Stuff like that. So putting the semantics and the information into the code is like really important so that it can be presented in different ways. And that's a core principle of WCAG. So that's always it's always nice to like bring it back to one of those four core principles that we have.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really think like we can make the web much more adaptable in the long run.
Let's hope so. Yeah. Oh, and you thank us as well. Okay.
Yes, of course. I thank you foremost.
Well, I was glad you replied and you wanted to join me. And I think you're a Doctor Who fan. I can think we can conclude that again. Yeah. It's even more clear.
Could be.
Yeah.
You could also just look at my avatar that I use everywhere.
But I would have to recognize it then, right?
Police box, yes.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, thank you. If anybody in the chat now thinks like, hey, I'm really excited about this or that media query, I'm really curious to hear that. I think that I would like the high and low contrast. I think that's really interesting. I think there's a lot of use cases there. Also because I tend to make websites that are not completely high contrast, because I've met people that don't appreciate the full contrast that's possible. But basically every website I visit has a white background.
Yeah.
So maybe
unless they're in dark mode, then they have a black background. That's like magic there.
Dark mode magic. So yeah, I think it's very clear. We've got some really interesting. Is there one that stands out for you? Like you're looking forward the most to one or another?
I think for me it's probably the forced colors one. What I want is like Windows high contrast mode functionality everywhere in every browser and in every screen and every device. That would
so
be
you only
amazing.
have to do it once, and it would be more predictable and.
Yeah, and I could like on my computer I could put my preferred color scheme and it would sync to all my devices and I could just switch it on and it would just work. I think that would make a real difference for people. That would be really nice.
Yeah, that's a great level of customization. Yeah.
I mean, the thing that I really, really wanted, like a couple of years ago, that is already fulfilled, and that's just stopping autoplay in browsers. It was like the one thing I was like, you have a browser, you need to read that, you need to make the autoplay happen. Just don't. Just
if you can have one wish, yeah.
Yeah. And
I actually did this with Pinterest. Like, there are many reasons to complain about Pinterest. But I like it to browse in a visual way. You've got this like overview of images, and I like to scan it and get a quick impression. I'm pretty visual. But then they started adding these video elements. It's like something is moving along all the quiet stuff, and it's like noisy, and it just grabs your attention, and you cannot ignore it. And it's like, so I changed it in my browser.
That's terrible. I really don't like that. That's why I usually also am very like sparse with like posting GIFs on the web, because they're fun, and I personally like them.
The first time,
if you do something like really nice with them, they can be like a good funny thing. But I always think like twice or three times, like, do I really need to post that? Do I really need to do that with the GIF?
And then you ask yourself, is it from Doctor Who or is it from elsewhere?
Yeah, so basically Doctor Who GIFs are always like an okay. And the other thing is Homer Simpson walking backwards into the hedge. That's also one that I frequently use.
Yeah.
Because that's just that just needs to be done. There is a comment about not breaking back buttons in the chat, and
there's been some discussion about that, I believe, right?
Yeah, there has been some things just going on, and it's really interesting with like the back button. It's like such a standard thing, but in many situations it just doesn't work that well. Like if you open a new tab and you press the back button, it's often deactivated in most browsers. And I showed I almost said I discovered, but I didn't. It's just there. But I recognized that, like in Safari, if you open a tab, if you have a link and it opens in a new tab, you can click the back button and will just close the tab and go back where you've been. And that's super useful.
But also dangerous, I guess.
Sometimes you can then click the forward button and it will reopen the.
And it will okay.
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like this weird way with browsers that sometimes I want to go back in history, like 10 pages or something. Like, where did I come from? But I shouldn't do that in Safari then, maybe.
Well, you can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it only does that if the tab was opened by you clicking a link with in a new. With open
target blank or something.
With target blank. If you open it yourself, it doesn't do that.
Okay.
So
interesting.
So it has this distinction, but in all other browsers, it just breaks the back button and says, "This tab doesn't know where it come from." Although that's probably relatively easy to implement. Again, not knowing anything about browser development.
No,
it's probably a sweeping
I think it's also funny. I haven't read too much about the whole back button discussion. But to me, it really aligns with all these static page generators that we see right now. Because breaking back button is only a problem if you are working with a single page app or something. Like if you have basic HTML pages, you'll never have this issue. And it's just something like every time we try to reinvent something that's already incorporated in the web, there are so many things to consider, and odds are you will break something.
Yeah, and you have to like re-implement native browser functionality. Like if something gets, if the screen reader reads the title of a page after reloading, you have to basically fake that and say, "Oh, focus this," or use an aria.
What am I going to do with the focus in the first place? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, great, we have this thing that is in the browser. It's there and it just works.
Somebody already figured it out. Yeah. It's there for you to use.
That always baffles me.
Yeah.
And then you do it and you don't do it the same way, or you don't respect the user preference, because the user can say, "Don't read the page title. I don't want to know that stupid page title. I know what link I clicked on."
It's useless anyway.
Yeah. The user might say that, but you say, "Oh no, you have to work this way," like how I prescribe you're doing it. Um, and that's, yeah, that often breaks like the usefulness of such solutions. And I've seen that so often, like people thinking, yeah, that's a thing I need to re-implement, and then they fall down, and it's
Yeah.
like, it's the big problem with a lot of ARIA stuff, and I don't want to go into ARIA too much,
No,
because
but it
otherwise
applies to many things, I think.
exhausted.
It's also, for example, I'm a big fan of design systems. It gets a lot of people really enthusiastic. And there it's also often the idea that, like, you have, let's say you create a button in a design system, and somebody
Mm.
comes along and they say, hey, that's a great button, but performance-wise, you could really improve. And they maybe fix the performance, but they don't know what other considerations went into that button.
Right.
So they might not know that you also made it accessible, or that it fits perfectly into your brand styling, or that you, I don't know, made it really small. It could be anything. But every time you remake something, you look at it like this, you know? Like, I'm going to change this, and this is what
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on. And you don't know what you're ignoring. You don't know what you don't know. I mean, and I think that also goes with re-implementing some behavior that we already had. I mean, it's there. Use it.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm totally okay with, I see that we want to have like single page applications. They're useful in certain circumstances. You don't want to have like the reload and then another reload. But for like so many websites I go, I see those like, oh, and here are 5 megabytes of JavaScript you need to download first before
But you don't have to
see
reload. So,
anything.
yeah.
And I'm like, is that really necessary? Probably not. But now I got 5 megabytes of JavaScript.
Yeah.
Great.
Good luck with that. Yeah, and then now people kind of discover static pages, and they're like, they're so fast.
Yes.
That's how the web
Surprise.
was when we started out. Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. But I think we've kept you for quite a while already. If there are any more questions in the chat, it's been an interesting conversation. So maybe somebody has something to add or question. It's always welcome. I'm very pleased that you were here. And if you
Yeah,
ever want to
happy
try
to
out a
be
new
here.
presentation or something, please do join us again. Maybe for the next XSU, you can practice.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, always happy to, like, speak with the community and and have conversations about stuff
Yeah.
like that. It's
And you also have
always fun.
you have a podcast as well, right?
I don't have a podcast.
Not anymore?
I have a podcast in my head that it should be forming at some point in some way, but it hasn't materialized yet.
Is that the only idea that you have in your head, or is it one of many?
That's one of the many ideas
Yeah.
I have in my head. The most active thing I'm doing is, apart from tweeting, is my blog on yatil.net. I'm thinking for a long time, since a couple of years actually, about doing a podcast, but it's so much work, and then
It is.
you want to make it accessible,
Yeah.
which I feel very strongly about, and
We've
that's
noticed.
just makes it even more work. So I've just didn't find the time until now.
So you can probably understand why I do no editing.
Yes, totally. I've no judgment there.
No. Well, thank you very much. Then I'm just going to say this is it for this time. I hope that next week I will be presenting something new. I'm working on a sort of one-pager starting point for accessibility, and I hope it's finished next week. And I do know that accessibility people, we can write books. I think you know all about that. We're very good at writing long texts, but I try to make it short. And let's see if I succeeded. Thanks so far. I'm going to press the big stop streaming button, so thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.